Governor Elara Vance stood alone on the observation deck, her hands pressed against the cold glass. Outside, the sky of New Horizon was filled with death. 300 alien warships hung in orbit like dark clouds waiting to storm. Their black hulls caught the light of the distant sun, and their weapons glowed with a soft blue fire that never went out. 40-7 days. The emergency beacon had been calling for help for 47 days, and no one had answered. New Horizon was a small colony. Just over 1 million people living on a planet called Kepler 442b. It sat at the very edge of human space. 112 light-years from Earth, the colonists had come here to build new lives. They had planted farms in the alien soil. They had raised children under unfamiliar stars. They had believed they were safe. They were wrong. The Vraxian Dominion had arrived without warning. Their fleet had dropped out of faster-than-light travel and surrounded the planet before anyone could react. The Vraxians were tall, thin creatures with gray skin and eyes like polished stones. They did not smile. They did not negotiate. They simply delivered their message. "You have entered sacred space," their commander had said. His name was Vrethkar, and his voice was cold and flat like metal scraping against metal. "Your colony is a violation. You will surrender your people for processing, or you will be destroyed." Processing. Everyone knew what that word meant. Slavery, death, or something worse. Governor Vance had refused. She had sent her answer across every communication channel so that every colonist could hear it. New Horizon belongs to humanity. We will not surrender our homes. We will not surrender our families. We will not surrender. That had been 47 days ago. Now the colony was dying. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin walked into the observation room. He was an old man with white hair and tired eyes, but he still wore his uniform with pride. He commanded the colony's defense fleet, though calling it a fleet was generous. 12 frigates. That was all they had. 12 small warships against 300 enemy vessels. 7 of those frigates were already destroyed. "The shields are failing," Admiral Chun said. His voice was heavy. "Sector 4 went down this morning. Sector 7 will follow by tonight. We have maybe 6 days before they fall completely." Governor Vance did not turn from the window. "And then? And then they land their armies. And we fight in the streets." Chun paused. "We won't win that fight, Governor. You know that." She knew. Of course she knew. But knowing something and accepting it were different things. "The beacon is still transmitting," she said. "Yes, but Earth is 112 light-years away. The closest United Earth Navy fleet is in the Tau Ceti sector. That's 40 light-years in the wrong direction. That's 40 light-years, and that's 40 light-years in the wrong direction." Chun shook his head slowly. "No one is coming, Elara. We need to accept that." The door opened again, and 3 more people entered. They were members of the Colony Council, the elected leaders who helped govern New Horizon. Councilman Dreyfus was the first to speak. He was a thin man with nervous hands and a voice that always sounded like he was apologizing. "Governor, we need to discuss our options," he said. "The Vraxians have offered terms. If we surrender peacefully, they say they will relocate our people to labor facilities instead of the alternative." "Labor facilities," Governor Vance repeated. The words tasted like poison. "You mean slave camps?" "I mean survival," Dreyfus said. "I have children, Governor. We all have children. Is our pride worth their lives?" The room fell silent. Outside, a Vraxian patrol ship drifted past the observation window, its weapons pointed at the city below. Councilwoman Reyes spoke next. She was a former soldier, and her voice was harder than Dreyfus's. "Surrender is death with extra steps. The Vraxians don't keep prisoners. They use them until they break, and then they dispose of them. I've seen the intelligence reports. Then what do you suggest? Dreyfus demanded. We can't fight them. We can run. What options do we have? We hold, Governor Vance said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. We hold, she repeated. Every day we survive is another day for help to arrive. Every hour we resist is another hour for Earth to respond. Dreyfus made a sound of frustration. Earth isn't coming. Don't you understand? We are alone out here. We have always been alone. The United Earth Navy has hundreds of systems to protect. They can't send a fleet across half the galaxy for one small colony. Governor Vance finally turned from the window. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with something that Dreyfus couldn't understand. You don't know Earth, she said. You were born here, Councilman. You've never walked the streets of the cities back home. You've never seen the memorials to the wars humanity fought against itself and the promises they made afterward. She stepped closer to him. Humanity doesn't abandon its people. That's not who we are. That's not who we've ever been. Pretty words, Dreyfus said bitterly. But words don't stop plasma cannons. No, but faith does. Hope does. Vance looked at each council member in turn. I'm not asking you to believe we'll win. I'm asking you to believe that our people deserve the chance to fight. I'm asking you to believe that somewhere out there, someone heard our call. Admiral Chun cleared his throat. Governor, with respect, even if Earth wanted to send help, the logistics are impossible. 112 light years. 9 days of continuous slipspace travel, minimum. No fleet has ever attempted that. Then they'll be the first. The old admiral stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly a small smile crossed his weathered face. You know, he said, I joined the Navy 60 years ago because I believed in something. I believed that humanity could be better than the sum of its fears. He straightened his uniform. I think I'd like to die still believing that. Governor Vance nodded. Then we hold. She walked back to the window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, impossibly far away, was Earth. Was anyone listening? Was anyone coming? She didn't know. She couldn't know. But she believed dot in the space above New Horizon. The emergency beacon continued its lonely cry for help. The signal traveled outward at the speed of light, bouncing from relay station to relay station, crossing the vast emptiness between stars. 47 days of silence. But silence, as humanity had learned long ago, was not the same as absence. Sometimes silence was just the quiet before the answer came. Governor. Vance pressed her hand against the glass and whispered to the stars. Please. We're still here. Please. Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka had not slept in 36 hours. She stood in the command center of United Earth Naval Headquarters in Geneva, watching the holographic display that floated in the center of the room. Red lights blinked across the map of human space. Each light was a crisis. Each light was a problem demanding her attention. But only one light mattered right now. New Horizon. Kepler 4, 2b, 112 light years away. The distress signal had arrived that morning, bounced through 17 relay stations across the galaxy. The message was broken and filled with static, but the words were clear enough. Colony under attack. Raxian forces. 300 ships. Requesting immediate assistance. The timestamp showed the message was 47 days old. Admiral. Captain Morrison approached her desk with a tablet in his hands. He was her chief of operations, a young man with sharp eyes and a talent for logistics. I've run the numbers. A relief fleet would need to cross 112 light years. Even with our newest slipspace drives, that's 9 days of continuous travel. I know the math, Captain. 9 days is brutal on ships and crews. We'd be burning out drive cores. We'd have sailors collapsing from slipspace fatigue. Morrison hesitated. And even if we got there, we'd be facing 300 enemy warships. Our available forces in this sector number less than 200. Admiral Tanaka turned to face him. She was a small woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, but there was nothing small about her presence. When she spoke, people listened. How many ships do we have across all sectors? Morrison blinked. All sectors? Admiral, that would mean pulling ships from defense positions across human space. The outer colonies would be exposed. The trade routes would be vulnerable. The Senate would never approve. I didn't ask about the Senate. I asked about ships. The captain swallowed and checked his tablet. If we issued a full recall, battlecruisers from Mars Defense Command, carrier groups from the Proxima shipyards, destroyer squadrons from Sirius and Epsilon Eridani. He did the calculations quickly. We could assemble approximately 800 combat-ready vessels. Maybe more if we include reserve units. Do it. Morrison stared at her. Admiral? Initiate Protocol Omega. Full recall of all combat vessels to Sol staging point. Admiral Tanaka's voice was calm and steady. I want every ship that can fight assembled within 72 hours. Admiral, that's unprecedented. The political consequences alone. Captain Morrison. Tanaka stepped closer to him, and though she barely reached his shoulder, he felt very small. There are 1.2 million human beings on New Horizon. They have been fighting alone for 47 days. They sent a beacon because they believed we would answer. Her eyes were hard as steel. Are you suggesting we prove them wrong? Morrison stood straighter. No, Admiral. I'll begin transmissions immediately. He left quickly, and Admiral Tanaka returned to the holographic display. She touched a control, and the image zoomed in on the Kepler 442 system. Somewhere in that tiny point of light, people were dying. People were hoping. The door opened again, and Senator Williams entered. He was a large man with a red face and expensive clothes, and he looked very unhappy. Admiral Tanaka, I've just received word that you're initiating a full fleet recall. Is this true? Yes, Senator. Are you insane? Williams moved to stand beside her, his voice rising. You're leaving our core systems defenseless. What happens if the Centauri coalition decides to test our borders? What happens if pirates hit our shipping lanes? Then they'll face the consequences when our fleet returns. This is madness. One colony, Admiral. One small colony on the edge of nowhere. You cannot risk the entire defense network for, Senator. Admiral Tanaka's voice cut through his protests like a blade. Let me explain something to you. Every colony in human space is watching what we do next. Every human being on every planet and station and ship is waiting to see how Earth responds when its children cry for help. She pointed at the display. If we abandon New Horizon, we don't just lose one colony. We lose something far more valuable. We lose the trust of every person who has ever looked at the stars and believed that humanity would be there for them. Williams sputtered. That's sentiment, Admiral. War is not fought with sentiment. You're wrong. Tanaka turned to face him fully. War is fought with soldiers who believe their sacrifice matters. War is fought with civilians who trust their government to protect them. War is fought with the certainty that when you fall, someone will pick you up. She shook her head. Abandon New Horizon, and you destroy that certainty. You tell every colonist that they're expendable. That distance matters more than duty. And if we lose? Williams demanded. If we send our fleet and they're destroyed, then we lose fighting for something worth fighting for. Admiral Tanaka smiled grimly. That's more than most people get. The senator opened his mouth to argue further, but something in her eyes stopped him. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Over the next 72 hours, Admiral Tanaka watched the impossible happen. Ships came. From every corner of human space, ships came. Battle cruisers broke orbit from Mars, their crews canceling leave and racing back to their stations. Carrier groups at Proxima Centauri abandoned scheduled maintenance and powered up their drives. Destroyer squadrons in the Sirius system received the recall order in the middle of training exercises and immediately set course for Earth. Veterans came out of retirement, showing up at recruitment offices with old uniforms that still fit and eyes that still burned. Reserve units activated, their members leaving jobs and families behind without hesitation. Civilian cargo ships volunteered to carry supplies, their captains refusing payment. By the end of the third day, 847 warships had assembled at the Sol staging point. It was the largest human fleet ever formed, stretching across thousands of kilometers of space. At its heart was the UEN, Defiance. The Defiance was humanity's first and only dreadnought-class vessel. It had taken 30 years to build, and nothing like it had ever existed before. 4 kilometers long, covered in layers of armor and bristling with weapons. It was a mountain of metal that could move between stars. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Defiance and looked out at her fleet. 847 ships. Hundreds of thousands of sailors and soldiers. All of them ready to cross an impossible distance to save people they had never met. She opened the channel to every ship in the fleet. This is Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka. In a few hours, we will begin the longest combat deployment in human history. 9 days of hard travel. 9 days of pushing our ships and ourselves to the limit. At the end of that journey, we will face an enemy fleet that outnumbers us. She paused, letting the words sink in. New Horizon has held for 47 days. They have held because they believed in us. They believed that no matter how far they were from home, home would come for them. A voice hardened. Now we prove them right. Now we show them, and everyone else in this galaxy, what that faith is worth. The fleet acknowledged her transmission with a wave of responses. Ready. Standing by. For Earth, for humanity. Admiral Tanaka gave the order. All ships, engage slipspace drives. Set course for Kepler 442. 847 ships tore open holes in reality and vanished into the space between spaces. The journey had begun. Day 53 of the siege. The shields were dying. Governor Vance watched the status displays with exhausted eyes. Sector 4 had collapsed 2 days ago. Sector 7 fell last night. Sector 12 was flickering like a candle in the wind, and the engineers said it would go dark within hours. When the shields failed completely, the Vraxians would land their armies. And then the real dying would begin. Governor. A young aide approached her, his face pale with fear and lack of sleep. Admiral Chun reports that the enemy has established beachheads on the northern continent. 3 landing zones. Approximately 10,000 Vraxian soldiers. 10,000. The colonial militia numbered less than 5,000, and half of them had never held a weapon before the siege began. What are our casualties? The aide looked at his tablet, and his hands trembled slightly. 14,000 confirmed dead. Another 8,000 wounded. The hospitals are running out of supplies, ma'am. 14,000 dead. 14,000 people who had woken up on a peaceful morning 53 days ago, never imagining that they would die defending their homes from alien invaders. Vance closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe. She couldn't afford to break. Not now. Not when everyone was watching in orbit above the planet. Commander Vrethkar studied his tactical display with cold satisfaction. The humans were breaking. Their shields were failing. Their tiny fleet had been reduced to 7 crippled ships that could barely maneuver, let alone fight. Their ground forces were outnumbered and outgunned. And still they refused to surrender. It was puzzling. Vrethkar had conquered 17 worlds in his career. He had seen species fight, and he had seen species fall. But he had never seen anything quite like this. His communications officer approached. "Commander, we have intercepted another transmission from the colony governor." "Play it." Governor Vance's voice filled the bridge, thin and tired but unbowed. "People of New Horizon, today marks 53 days since our enemy arrived. 53 days of fighting. 53 days of holding the line. I know you are tired. I know you are scared. I know some of you have lost people you love." Vrethkar listened with curiosity. Humans were emotional creatures. He expected begging. He expected despair. Instead, Vance's voice grew stronger. "But I also know what you have done. I have seen farmers pick up rifles and stand against alien soldiers. I have seen teachers organize evacuation routes for children. I have seen engineers work through the night to keep our shields running one more hour, one more day. You have shown me what humanity is made of. And I have never been more proud." She paused. "The enemy believes we are broken. They are wrong. As long as one of us still stands, as long as one of us still fights, New Horizon is not defeated. We are not defeated. And we never will be." The transmission ended. Vrethkar sat in silence for a moment. "Interesting," he said finally. "Foolish, but interesting." He gave orders to increase the bombardment of remaining shield generators. The humans would learn their lesson soon enough, on the ground. The defenders fought with everything they had taught in the northern mountains. A militia unit led by a woman named Rosa Mendez ambushed a Vraxian armored column. They had no military weapons, only mining equipment and homemade explosives. They destroyed 6 enemy vehicles before being forced to retreat. Rosa lost her husband in that fight, but she picked up his rifle and kept shooting. In the capital city, a teenage girl named Lin Chun worked in a basement full of salvaged electronics. She was 16 years old and had been studying engineering before the invasion. Now she spent her days hacking into Vraxian communication satellites, jamming their targeting systems, feeding them false information. The enemy couldn't figure out why their precision weapons kept missing their targets. In orbit, Admiral Chun's 7 remaining ships refused to die. They couldn't fight the Vraxian fleet directly. That would be suicide. But they could hurt them. They struck at supply ships. They attacked sensor platforms. They launched missiles from unexpected angles and ran before the enemy could respond. The Vraxians lost 12 ships to these attacks. It was nothing compared to their total force, but it was something. It was proof that the humans were still fighting. Vrethkar ordered his intelligence officers to interrogate the prisoners they had taken. He wanted to understand these creatures. A captured human pilot was brought before him. The pilot's name was James Wright, and his face was covered in bruises from his beating. His flight suit was torn and stained with blood. "You will answer my questions," Vrethkar said. "Tell me about Earth's military response." Wright looked up at him and, impossibly, smiled through his broken teeth. "You want to know about Earth? Sure, I'll tell you about Earth." He laughed, and the sound made several Vraxian guards shift uncomfortably. "You think you've won because you surrounded one colony. You think you're strong because you have 300 ships. But you have no idea what you've started. Earth is far away," Vrethkar said. "My intelligence confirms no human fleet movements toward this system." "Then your intelligence is wrong. Or maybe they just haven't seen it yet." Wright's smile widened. "I've served on 3 different continents back home. I've seen what humans do when someone attacks their own. We don't forget. We don't forgive. And we don't stop." Vrethkar leaned closer. "You expect rescue? From 100 light years away. I expect hell to open up and swallow you whole." Wright spit blood onto the floor. And when it does, I hope I live long enough to see your face." The commander had the pilot dragged back to his cell. The words meant nothing. Humans were known for their emotional outbursts and empty threats. And yet, something about the pilot's certainty disturbed him. On day 53, the colony's emergency beacon finally failed. The power systems that had kept it running for nearly 2 months simply gave out. Governor Vance was informed immediately. She walked to the communications center, where her exhausted engineers were staring at dead screens. How long to fix it? She asked. The chief engineer, an old woman named Dr. Patel, shook her head. "The main unit is destroyed. We'd have to build a new one from scratch. Then build one from scratch." Patel looked at her with disbelief. "Governor, we don't have the parts. We don't have the power. Doctor." Vance put her hand on the old woman's shoulder. "Somewhere out there, Earth is listening. They need to know we're still here. They need to hear us." Patel stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly and began shouting orders to her team. 6 hours later, a new beacon began transmitting. It was ugly, built from salvaged parts and held together with wire and hope. But it worked. The signal flew outward into the void dot in orbit. Raxian sensors barely noticed. It was just another human transmission. Meaningless noise from a dying colony dot. And then, at the edge of the system, something happened. Dot space began to tear. A Vraxian sensor officer stared at his display with confusion. Gravitational anomalies were appearing throughout the outer system. One, then another. Then 10, then 50, then hundreds. "Commander," he said, his voice suddenly uncertain, "we're detecting slipspace emergence signatures." Many signatures. Rethkar turned to look at the display. His stone-like eyes widened. The sky was ripping open. And through the tears, something was coming. Something vast. Something angry. Something human. The universe screamed as 847 human warships tore their way back into normal space. They emerged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the strange energy of slipspace travel. Running lights blazed to life across the fleet like stars being born. Weapons charged with a hum that could be felt across thousands of kilometers. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the tactical display fill with enemy contacts. 312 Raxian warships. Exactly as intelligence had predicted. "All ships," she said calmly, "assume attack formation. Weapons free." The response came from 847 captains speaking as one. "Acknowledged." Then Admiral Tanaka opened the channel that broadcast across every frequency in the system. Her voice reached every Raxian ship. It reached every human on the planet below. It reached the empty spaces between worlds. "This is Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Navy. You are engaged in hostile action against human civilians. You have one opportunity to withdraw from this system. There will not be a second." In his command ship, Rethkar listened to the transmission with shock that slowly transformed into calculation. The human fleet was larger than he had believed possible, but he still held the advantage. His ships were fresh and undamaged. The humans had just completed 9 days of continuous slipspace travel. Their crews would be exhausted. Their ships would be strained dot, and he still outnumbered them dot almost. "All ships," Rethkar ordered, "form battle array. We will crush these reinforcements and finish what we started." 300 Raxian warships began a move, arranging themselves into the classic Dominion attack formation. A broad wedge designed to overwhelm enemies through concentrated firepower. Admiral Tanaka watched them move and smiled grimly. "They're taking the bait," Captain Morrison said from his station. "They think we're going to fight them head on. Then let's show them something different." Tanaka touched her display. Wolfpack squadrons, Execute flanking maneuver. Carrier groups. Launch all fighters. Battlecruisers. Form defensive screen around the troop transports. She paused and tell the Defiance's weapons officers to pick their targets. The human fleet exploded into motion. Destroyer squadrons nicknamed Wolfpacks for their hunting tactics broke away from the main formation and burned hard toward the enemy's flanks. They were small ships, fast and deadly, designed to strike and run before larger vessels could respond. From the carriers, thousands of human fighter craft launched into the void. They formed protective screens around the fleet, intercepting the missile salvos that the Braxians were already launching. The battlecruisers moved into position around a group of troop transports. These ships were not here to fight. They were here to reach the planet. They were here to land Marines on New Horizon. And at the center of everything, the Defiance advanced. Vrethkar saw the dreadnought coming and made a decision. That ship was the heart of the human fleet. Destroy it, and the humans would lose their nerve. All ships, concentrate fire on the large vessel. Full power to weapons. 300 Vraxian warships turned their guns on the Defiance. Plasma lances beams of superheated energy capable of cutting through steel like paper struck. The dreadnought from every direction. The Defiance did not slow down. Vrethkar watched in disbelief as his weapons splashed harmlessly against the human ship's shields. Layer after layer of protection absorbed the assault, flickering but not failing. Impossible, his tactical officer breathed. No ship can withstand that much firepower. Then we hit it harder. Vrethkar's voice was tight with anger. All ships maintain fire. Break through those shields. But the shields did not break. And while the Vraxian fleet focused on the Defiance, the Wolfpacks reached their flanks. Destroyer squadrons tore into the edges of the Vraxian formation with torpedo volleys and precision strikes. Ships that had turned their weapons toward the Defiance suddenly found enemies behind them. Hitting their weaker rear armor, the Vraxian wedge began to fragment. And then the Defiance returned fire. The dreadnought's main batteries activated. These were not plasma lances or conventional missiles. These were directed energy weapons of a type the Vraxians had never encountered. Beams of focused particles that moved at nearly the speed of light. The first shot struck a Vraxian cruiser amidships. The ship did not explode. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, and the next moment there was only glowing debris. The second shot destroyed two ships that had made the mistake of flying in close formation. The third shot carved through a battleship's engine section and left it spinning helplessly into space. Vrethkar stared at the destruction with growing horror. This was not a battle. This was a demonstration. The humans were showing the entire Vraxian dominion, what happened when you attacked their people. Commander, his sensor officer's voice was high with panic. The human troop transports are breaking through our lines. They're heading for the planet. Vrethkar spun to look at the display. While his fleet had been focused on the Defiance, the human battlecruisers had punched a hole through the weakened Vraxian formation. Troop transports were pouring through the gap, burning hard for New Horizon. Marines. The humans were landing Marines on the colony. Intercept them, Vrethkar ordered. Stop those transports. But his ships were too scattered, too damaged, too busy trying to survive the Wolfpack attacks and the Defiance's devastating firepower. The transports reached the planet's atmosphere and began their descent. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Tanaka received the report with quiet satisfaction. First wave is landing. Colonial Defense Forces are moving to support. And the enemy fleet? Captain Morrison checked his display. They're breaking, Admiral. Their formation is completely disrupted. We're seeing multiple ships attempting to retreat. Don't let them. Tanaka's voice was cold. Fast attack squadrons moved to block escape routes. I want every Vraxian ship in this system captured or destroyed. The battle continued for 3 more hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Vraxian fleet, designed to overwhelm a defenseless colony, found itself outmaneuvered and outgunned at every turn. Human tactics were not like anything they had faced before. The humans fought as a single organism, each ship knowing exactly where it needed to be and what it needed to do, one by one. Vraxian ships surrendered or died, and then, from the planet's shadow, 7 battered shapes emerged. Admiral Chen's colonial defense fleet, the ships that had fought for 53 days against impossible odds, limped out of hiding. Their shields were gone. Their hulls were scorched and torn. Some of them were barely able to fly, but they were still fighting. Admiral Tanaka watched them approach and felt her throat. Titan, this is Admiral Chun Wei-lin of the New Horizon Defense Force. A tired voice crackled over the communication channel, requesting permission to join the battle line. Tanaka keyed her response. Admiral Chun, this is Admiral Tanaka. Permission granted. She paused. It's an honor to fight alongside you. There was a moment of silence. When Chun spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. You came. We didn't know if anyone would hear us. We didn't know if anyone would care. He laughed weakly. But you came. We will always come, Admiral. That's what family does. The 7 colonial ships took their place in the formation alongside the Armada from Earth. They were tiny and broken compared to the gleaming warships around them. But they were welcomed as heroes, because they were heroes. In his command ship, Commander Vrethkar watched his fleet die around him. The humans had surrounded his remaining ships. Escape was impossible. Surrender was... He had never surrendered in his life. But as he looked at the destruction around him, at the burning wreckage of Vraxian cruisers, at the human dreadnought that still advanced unstoppably through his lines, he realized something. He had made a terrible mistake. He had thought he was attacking a weak and distant colony, isolated from support. He had thought humans were like other species, willing to sacrifice their own to preserve the whole. He was wrong. Humans did not abandon their own. They crossed impossible distances. They fought against impossible odds. They did not stop, and they did not give up. And they did not forgive. And now, Commander Vrethkar was going to pay the price for learning that lesson. His communications officer looked at him with fear in his stone-like eyes. Commander? Your orders. Vrethkar closed his eyes. When he opened them, his face was empty. Signal the fleet. All ships, surrender. The guns fell silent over New Horizon. In orbit, Vraxian warships drifted with their weapons powered down and their engines cold. Human ships moved among them, collecting surrender signals and boarding the vessels one by one. Commander Vrethkar stood on the bridge of his command ship with his hands bound, watching as human marines took control of everything he had built. On the planet below, the story was the same. Vraxian ground forces, cut off from orbital support and surrounded by human marines, faced a simple choice: surrender or die. Most chose surrender. The ones who chose to fight discovered that human soldiers were very good at granting that request. By sunset on the first day after the battle, New Horizon was free. Governor Alara Vance stood at the shattered spaceport, watching the last of the marine dropships descend through the orange sky. She had not slept in 4 days. She had not eaten in 2. But she refused to leave this spot until she could look Admiral Tanaka in the eye and say the words that had been building in her chest for 53 days. The dropship landed with a hiss of cooling engines. The ramp lowered, and Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka walked down to meet her. The Admiral was smaller than Vance had imagined. Her uniform was crisp despite the long journey, and her eyes were sharp and clear. She moved with the confidence of someone who had faced impossible situations and won. Governor Vance opened her mouth to speak. She had prepared a speech. She had practiced the words, the proper expressions of gratitude, the formal acknowledgments of sacrifice and duty. Instead, her voice broke, and all she could say was, "You came." Admiral Tanaka stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the younger woman. The embrace was warm and strong and real. "We will always come," Tanaka said quietly. "That is what we do. That is who we are." Vance clung to her for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Around them, Marines and colonists embraced each other, strangers, meeting for the first time, but connected by something deeper than words. In the days that followed, the full cost of the siege became clear. 20-3,000. 847 people had died. Some were soldiers. Most were not. They were farmers who had picked up weapons they barely knew how to use. They were engineers who had worked until their hearts gave out. They were parents who had shielded their children with their own bodies. The funeral services lasted 16 hours. Every name was read aloud. Every life was remembered. Admiral Chen Wei-lin stood at the memorial wall, looking at the list of names. His own son was among them, a young lieutenant who had died defending a shield generator on day 31. Governor Vance found him there, his weathered face wet with tears. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for all of it." Chun shook his head slowly. "Don't be sorry. He died believing that his sacrifice mattered. He died knowing that we wouldn't give up." The old admiral looked up at the sky. "He died knowing that Earth was coming. Even if he didn't live to see it." "How did you know?" Vance asked. "How did you hold on for so long, not knowing if anyone would answer?" Chun smiled sadly. "I didn't know. None of us knew. But we hoped. And sometimes, Governor, hope is enough." Across the galaxy, news of the Battle of Kepler 442 spread like fire. The Vraxian Dominion received a single transmission from Admiral Tanaka. It contained sensor logs showing every moment of the battle, the emergence of the human fleet, the systematic destruction of Vraxian warships, the capture of Commander Vrethkar, the liberation of New Horizon. Attached to the logs were 7 words: "Touch our people again. We dare you." The Dominion High Council met in emergency session. They argued about response. They debated retaliation. And then, one by one, they fell silent, because they had seen what humans would do for a single colony. They had seen a fleet cross 112 light years, a distance that should have been impossible in 9 days. They had seen 800 warships assembled in 72 hours. They had seen what happened when you made humanity angry. The Dominion did not respond to Tanaka's message. They did not need to. Everyone knew what their silence meant. Other species watched as well. The Centauri Coalition, the merchants of the Outer Rim, the scattered independent worlds that had always viewed humanity as aggressive but disorganized, too spread across the stars to protect their own. They learned differently now. When humans cried out, other humans answered. It did not matter how far the cry traveled. It did not matter how many enemies waited at the journey's end. Humanity would come, and they would come with everything they had. 3 months after the battle, a Vraxian diplomat named Kethvora traveled to Earth to discuss reparations. She met with humanity's ambassador, a calm man named David Chun, in a conference room overlooking the rebuilt city of Geneva. The negotiations were simple. The Vraxian Dominion would pay for the reconstruction of New Horizon. They would return all captured colonists. They would recognize human territorial claims in the Kepler sector. But before the papers were signed, Kethvora asked a question that had troubled her people since the battle ended. "Why?" she said. "Why did you risk so much? You left your other systems exposed. You pushed your ships beyond their limits. You crossed a distance that our own vessels could barely manage in twice the time. She shook her head in confusion. All for one small colony on the edge of your space. Why? Ambassador Chun looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Because they're ours, he said simply. And we don't leave our people behind. Kefera stared at him, trying to understand. In the Vraxian Dominion, distant colonies were expendable. Sacrifices were made for the greater good. Weakness was cut away so that strength could survive. She realized, in that moment, that she would never truly understand humanity. And perhaps that was what made them so dangerous. On New Horizon, life slowly returned to normal. The shields were rebuilt, stronger than before. New defense platforms were installed in orbit. A permanent United Earth Navy task force was stationed in the system ships that would never leave. Ships that would always be watching. Governor Vance remained in office, though she had offered to resign. The colonists refused to accept. She had held them together through the darkest days. She had believed when no one else could. They would not let her go. Admiral Chun retired from active service. He spent his days at the memorial wall, tending the flowers that grew around the names of the fallen. Sometimes other veterans joined him. They never spoke much. They didn't need to. One evening, 6 months after the liberation, a young girl named Maya walked through the rebuilt spaceport with her mother. Maya was 8 years old. She had spent the siege hiding in a basement shelter, listening to the sound of explosions above. Now she looked up at the night sky and saw something wonderful. Among the stars, lights were moving. Running lights of patrol ships, Earth's patrol ships, keeping watch over her world. They moved in slow, careful patterns, always there, always watching. Maya raised her hand and waved at them. Her mother smiled. They can't see you, sweetheart. I know, Maya said, but I'm waving anyway. She waved until her arm got tired, and then she kept waving a little more. Because somewhere up there, in those tiny moving lights, were people who had crossed the galaxy to save her. People she would never meet. People who had risked everything for a colony they had never seen. And even though they couldn't see her wave, she knew that they were waving back above New Horizon. The patrol ships continued their endless watch. The stars burned cold and bright around them. And in the space between worlds, a message echoed that would never be forgotten, that we will always come. That is what family does.